Americans are taking it to the streets, but is that the best way to get businesses reopened? I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, you've probably seen in a multitude, or I shouldn't say a multitude, in multiple states, there have been some protests, some people in their cars, other people like in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, out on the steps of the Capitol building, raising up their grievance that businesses have been closed, and that is hurting the economy badly, hurting them personally badly. And Bill, the question today that I'd like to ask is not really whether you think these people are right about what they're saying. I think I already know the answer to that. The question really is, are these kinds of protests involving a relative handful of people in a relative handful of states the most fruitful way to accomplish the purpose of the protesters?
What other way is there? I mean, this is the entire idea of a right to peaceable assembly. Nothing gets politicians' attention more than signs of the great unwashed out there in a giant mass of knuckle-dragging humanity armed with pitchforks and torches. That's basically all that they listen to. What other recourse do they have? Well,
other than the fact that everything you said about these things is inaccurate. In other words, it's not a giant mass. There are no pitchforks and torches. They're all very peaceful assemblies. And frankly, I'm trying to think, unless you go to really huge movements like the civil rights movement and things like that, where literally millions of people were involved in it. I'm trying to think of an example in the past where politicians really paid attention to a handful of people who were caterwauling on the steps of the Capitol.
Well, first of all, there's a word that you might be interested in looking up. I think it'll help us in the future with the show. It's called hyperbole. And hyperbole is a form of intentional exaggeration. It's a form of intentional exaggeration designed to make a point. It doesn't matter how big the crowds are right now. What matters is there are people who have gone to the trouble to stand outside the governor's office and protest in a number of different places. The gridlock situation that they did in Ann Arbor a week or two ago, that wasn't a trivial protest. That got everybody's attention. And this is what they need to see. This is what the politicians need to see. I think the American people have been astonishingly cooperative and astonishingly well-behaved. A lot of people are saying, oh, submissive. It's like, look, submissive is when somebody orders you to do something and you don't want to do it, you do it and so you don't. I've never felt that, but I am rapidly feeling, not just here in California, but all around the country, that it is now time to basically go back to the business of getting back to work, which means getting more people infected. This is the entire point.
So this is the purpose of the protest, to get people out there and get them infected from each other?
Yes, that's exactly correct. Yes. And if you don't understand that, if you're one of these people who say, if you're you obviously a death lover and a Satanist, because you want people to die. I don't want anybody to die. This is a very simple thing. And yet again, catastrophic failure of the news media. But let's just recap for the sake of
before you get into the recap, I want to clarify, because at first I thought you were saying that the purpose of the actual protest, gathering on the steps of the Capitol in Harrisburg, is to cause infections to pass from person to person. But you're not saying that, are you?
No, I'm saying the purpose of the protests is to go back and reopen the country, and that as a result of reopening the country, people will become infected with COVID-19. And this is the thing that the press it never, ever explains and should have explained from the beginning. So just very quickly, because I know how people take stuff out of context, and I'm looking at you there, Media Matters, what I'm basically saying is this. Flattening the curve means elongating the curve. That means that there's a longer time from the first case to there's never going to be a last case, but basically the bottom of the pandemic. The reason we locked the country down for 6 weeks is to stop a spike that would get so high that it would exceed our healthcare ability to care for people. But if you're gonna flatten the curve, you also extend the curve. That means that the same number of people, more or less, are going to get infected as if we didn't do anything. The entire purpose of this was to make sure that the hospital systems weren't so overloaded that people were dying who didn't need to die because they couldn't get treatment. And that's not just COVID sufferers, that's heart attack victims, car accidents, all of that stuff. So now that the cases are on the decline, it's time for us to go back to work. And it's sort of a phased arrangement. I don't think there should be an official phased arrangement, but clearly there are some things that we can do immediately and should have done quite a while ago. But basically, then what will happen is, as the social quarantines start to ease, the number of cases will start to go back up again. And the only thing that matters is does it stay below the ability of our critical care facilities to handle? And I don't think anybody thinks that there's going to be the same kind of spike that we saw when we made this order to shut down, because that thing was going practically vertical. It was a genuine exponential curve, and it was doubling nearly every day. So yes, for those people who don't understand this stuff and who think that the protesters are stupid because, geez, if they go back out there, they're just going to get infected. They know that. Everybody knows that.
Now, again, Bill, the point of my question is, because I know you've done 24 episodes of the Coronasphere Lounge, you've done many other programs. We've done some 59 shows so far by my count at billwhittle.com related to the COVID-19 novel coronavirus pandemic. So your position, at least in my mind and in that of our regular viewers, is pretty clear. I guess the thing that mystifies me is the idea that people who are, by and large, I think, conservatives and Republicans are now seeing organized public protests, chanting, megaphones, holding up signs as their best avenue for effecting change, when typically that's a tactic more of the left, no?
Well, you could have made a pretty good point about that, Scott. Anytime prior to 2009, I think that would have been
Before the Tea Party
a valid point. Yes, sir.
And so now what it seems like is you're saying that conservatives have thrown up their hands and said the way the Constitution works from our perspective is not going through our elected representatives and trying to influence them, making phone calls, sending emails, petitioning them individually. It is going out and making a stink in public in a way that will draw TV cameras so that we're, kind of like hippies in the late 60s.
It's not a question of drawing the TV cameras, although that's a benefit of it. It's a question of having lawmakers look out their window and seeing angry citizens outside. That's what it's a question of.
Well, most of those guys are home, actually. So,
well, okay.
Except for the governors.
Then they can watch them on TV. When they tried the big gun grab in Virginia, and I don't know how many thousands, hundreds of thousands, I think it was, people turned out. That got people's attention, whether the governor realized it or not. That, when I talk about the angry crowds with the pitchforks and the torches, I don't actually mean that they have pitchforks and torches. I mean that the presence of the population rising up is something that gets politicians' attention in a way that a strongly worded letter doesn't. And the thing that I think virtually all politicians realize, whether they want to admit it or not, is the fundamental difference between a conservative protest and a progressive protest. Progressives protest recreationally. That's what they do just for fun. It's their job. They get paid for it. It's their hobby. They do nothing but design it. It's practically a sexual fantasy for them. They protest all the time about everything. But when conservatives are motivated enough to actually go out and stand in front of the state capitol or have a Tea Party rally someplace, that means the situation is serious. If the hardworking, quiet, silent people who obey the law are at the point where they're saying, no, we are right at the limit of our tolerance, that's something that the government ought to pay damn close attention to. And I think the president understands this extremely well. And now it's a question of each individual governor. That's how it should be. I think the Federalist response to this pandemic has been exemplary. And if you take New York City, I'm not trying to lessen or be blasé about the number of people who have died in New York City, but the mayor was basically saying, no, nothing to worry about. And then if you take New York City out of the United States list of confirmed deaths from COVID-19, we're doing better than anybody in the world, and on a per capita basis, obviously. And so Yes, it is insane to apply the same standards to New York as you do to Montana. Dennis Prager pointed that out. We did a show on this not too long ago, Scott, where liberals were basically saying, well, you can't let Montana go back to work before New York. How do we know that people won't cross state lines and all of this hoopla? And Prager pointed out, and I thought brilliantly, by the way, what if half of the COVID deaths in the country were in Montana? Would that mean that New York would have to stay locked down? And no. So this movement is growing, but I'll tell you what's actually growing faster than this. And in a strange sort of way, I like this better just because I think it's more American. People are just disregarding the order. People are using their own judgment in terms of what they perceive the risk to be. And while there are individual people that make bad decisions, I've always believed in the wisdom of the American people as a group of people. And what I find is that the parking structure here at the studio, which is an essential business, by the way, the president and the governor made that clear at the beginning of the lockdown in, I want to say March, 19th or something, that media personalities, including internet personalities, are essential personnel. And I have to be ready in case the president says the country needs a podcast and needs one right now. But with that said, every day that goes by, there are more and more cars in our parking lot. Mayor Garcetti, much like Mayor de Blasio, has said, well, if you see somebody going to work who shouldn't be going to work, you need to call this number. And I'm sure they're getting the same response that New Yorkers gave Bill de Blasio, which was a series of photographs of genitalia and extended middle fingers, and the rest of the appropriate response that this call to snitch on your neighbors generated.
It's this particular tactic that I think is interesting, Bill. And I'm not saying that the protesters don't have a legitimate grievance. I'm not saying that they don't, that they may have become frustrated in their ability to convey that grievance through channels that they're familiar with. But I find it interesting that a public gathering protest of a couple of hundred people, in some of the best circumstances, when they're in their cars, more people get together. But it's fascinating because I think there are people who would agree with the point that we need to reopen businesses and observe social distancing protocols and all that kind of stuff and hygiene protocols, kind of backing out of this the same way we backed into it. But I can see a lot of people who would agree, let's open some businesses, who say, you know what? I don't think I'm going to show up on the steps of the Capitol with people who are on a full spectrum from Alex Jones all the way to Bill Whittle, as far as from being crazy to sane and scientifically reasonable. And I'm going to show up there among people breathing all over me to weigh in on this. I wonder if they're preventing some people who might be on their side from joining them because of the tactic they employed to do this.
You know what's great about America, Scott, is that if somebody thinks it's a bad idea to go out and stand with a group of protesters who are not wearing personal protective equipment, then they don't have to go.
It's actually a little bit more intense than that, though, Bill, because I've taken
How so?
I've read the comments. I made a comment in one of our previous shows about how it kind of bothered me when I went out to the grocery store and there were so many people who were not wearing any kinds of face masks or anything like that, just kind of ignoring what the CDC and the NIH and the Dr. Fauci and President Trump and everybody else said about it, or the governors of their states. And you wouldn't believe the vitriol, actually you would believe the vitriol, that rained down upon me that basically said, listen, you ninny, if you don't want to go out in public around people who aren't wearing face masks, then stay at home until it's over.
The people who make that argument, I find the argument that they make against you as a fallacious argument. And I'll tell you why. If you have ever seen the videos, they're mostly from 3 or 4 weeks ago now, of young people going out to grocery stores and licking the merchandise and spitting on it and opening jars and licking it, then you should be filled with a special kind of rage about that. Because what they've done is they've created a time bomb for somebody that they can't see. And they have intentionally swung their fist and then walked away before their fist got a chance to hit somebody else's nose. I think that it is appropriate to wear masks and gloves in a grocery store because it is because you are not limiting your choice, because the people who could be affected by your choice to not wear a mask are not there to take action. If I see somebody, let's say I think that masks are fantastic. Maybe I think the whole thing is a great idea. If I see somebody in a hallway or in an elevator and they're not wearing a mask, I have a choice of not getting on that elevator. But if somebody is breathing all over food and they're shedding viruses all over food, then that's affecting me. It's not affecting them. It's like putting mercury in a river downstream. Now, there will come a time when I hate to use this term because it's so badly overused and so few people genuinely understand it. So I'm not even going to say the word HI. But there does come a time when enough of the population has developed antibodies so that the chain of infection essentially just breaks. It is in a way, it's kind of like a wing that stalls. You would think that as a plane flew slower and slower and slower, it would just generate less and less lift. Doesn't work that way. Reaches a point when suddenly it just detaches and just drops and stalls. And contagion is like that too. There comes a point when enough people have immunity, and let's just call it pack immunity, as in, let's say, like a wolf pack. So when enough of the wolves have immunity, then it's not just a question of them being immune. It is then a question of having thinned the fuel that the virus needs to the degree where the virus can't spread anymore. And we're not at that point yet. And so, look, if somebody disagrees with you, they're welcome to do that. That's why this is a great country. That's why we talk about everything on this show, and that's why we don't enforce strict standards of what is the official line from BillWhittle.com.
I understand
hang on a second. I understand the argument that they're making. I do. I understand it, but it is in the case of a grocery store. It is a question of not just your personal decisions. You are affecting people who have no way of responding to your decision, and I find that to be a violation of my personal rights. I find that to be. I don't see how it's any different than having somebody going down and licking every piece of produce in the store.
So let me ask for the final question: if there are any other tactics, techniques, or strategies that you think people who believe this way, people who want to see, and there are many of them, want to see things reopening, other than going to the streets or standing out and holding up signs and chanting, is there anything else that you think people can be doing who feel this way that may be as effective or even more effective?
Yeah, and I think they're doing it right now, and I think it's what I mentioned earlier. I think they're just ignoring the order.
In the sense of going back to their place of business if they can.
I mean, they can't, individual citizens don't have the ability to open restaurants, but they do have the ability. I see more and more cars on the road every day and so on. And let me tell you why I'm in favor of this. I'm in favor of this because this strikes me as precisely how it should happen. If you assume that you're dealing with a population of free adults. And what I mean by that is, if you're the kind of person who either doesn't think, it's not even the kind of person, if you're a person who thinks that the risk is overblown and that the entire thing and the overreaction is completely out of whack, then those will likely be the first people out there violating the stay-at-home orders. If you are one of those people who feel like, no, this is the plague, and it's suicide to go out, then you don't have to. But the thing that I do think is important is that this is the only way to make sense out of it. And here's my main point, Scott. The closing point really is this: when the government announced these draconian measures, my take on it has been and continues to be that the huge, vast majority of the American people did it out of a sense of understanding that this was a real threat. This wasn't just a flu. And the fact that the numbers are much lower than we thought, I think evidence points clearly it's attributable to the social distancing, because that's when the curve came down. But put that aside. We, as a people, voluntarily agreed to do this for the good of our citizens. But every day that goes by, is a day, especially since the numbers are coming down. They told us we have to wait till the numbers are coming down. That's reasonable. They're coming down. So now what we find is, now we're starting to find out which one of these politicians are the ones that really, really, really like the idea of being able to tell people what to do and when to do it. Then it becomes no longer something that Americans are doing voluntarily for the common good. Now it's a question of, okay, now it's political tyranny. And every day that goes by, that balance becomes more and more tilted, and you're going to see more and more protests, and rightfully so. And ultimately, what's going to happen is, whether these liberal governors or not, I think New York is a unique case, but New York's business is New York's business. It's why this is a great country. It's their business. But even in California, people are just going to start disobeying the law. They're doing it already. I see it everywhere. And even Gavin Newsom cannot arrest 56 million people who, even though they are a long, long way away from the American mainstream, still maintain that sense of, okay, we did what we thought was the right thing to do. Now it's time for us to go back to work. And if you're going to tell us now that we have to stay locked down until you feel somehow comfortable about it, then we're just going to have to disobey that law. And if somebody says, if somebody just, let me rephrase that. If one of these governors or one of these mayors or one of these other people decide to challenge that, now I think it's time to get behind the Constitution. I know a lot of people who watch this show thought the time to do that was the instant that these measures were announced. I completely understand that position, and I understand the ideological purity of that position. But I also understand that in a case of an absolute emergency like this, which it is, I am willing to cooperate for the sake of my fellow citizens to a point. And that point is different for me, and it's different for you, and it's different for every single person watching this. Everybody's line at which point they say, okay, that's enough, is slightly different. And what I'm maintaining is that's a great thing, and that's how we should find our way out of this, is people should basically say, okay, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to take the risk. And as long as it doesn't look like we're going to exceed the healthcare capability, and it doesn't, considering that we stopped this enormous peak, then I think this is the only way to do it, is to let people decide for themselves.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you miss the gatherings of like-minded individuals for conversations about things that are important to you, you don't have to miss it anymore. You can go to billwhittle.com and click that Become a Member link, and you'll find what we've been doing well before this whole COVID-19 thing started to take hold. And that is that we have a place where you can go and express ideas and learn from others and gain encouragement and disagree, frankly, and help to prepare yourself for being able to engage these ideas in the marketplace. We invite you to join the rebellion against the progressive narrative today by going to billwhittle.com and clicking that Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.